The soft hum of the horizon reverberated through its metal hull as Captain Lila Graves stood before the bridge's expansive viewports, gazing at the endless sea of stars. The galaxy, once a vibrant web of thriving civilizations, now felt like a void. Earth was nothing but a memory, a distant, haunting echo. Humanity had been wiped out, scattered to the wind by the merciless Skrill. And yet, Lila had carried on. She had become humanity's last hope, its lone voice in the dark silence of space. The ship, once a symbol of human ingenuity, now felt more like a tomb. Only a handful of survivors remained aboard. Lila's mind often drifted back to the day the X-Krill arrived. A day that seemed like a lifetime ago. The X-Krill's fleet had been too powerful, their technology too advanced. They were ruthless conquerors, each ship designed for war, each soldier biologically engineered for one purpose, to destroy. In the wake of humanity's destruction, the Horizon had become a ghost ship, drifting in the void, a last remnant of a species that once ruled the stars. Lila's crew had dwindled to mere fragments, the few who had managed to survive the X-Krill's onslaught. Every day felt like a battle, not against alien invaders, but against the overwhelming weight of loss. The silence that filled the corridors of the ship was deafening, and in it, Lila often found herself questioning if humanity's fight was ever meant to succeed. But today, something was different. Her communications officer, Lieutenant Orion Holt, turned from his station, his expression unreadable. "Captain," he said, his voice steady but edged with uncertainty. "We've detected an anomaly. A structure of unknown origin. It's unlike anything we've seen." Lila's heart skipped a beat. Her instincts flared. This could be a trap. The X-Krill had used every trick to hunt them down. Still, a sense of hope began to stir in her chest. Could this be a sign? Could there be something out there, beyond their reach, that held the key to humanity's survival? "Plot a course," Lila commanded, her voice cutting through the still air. "Prepare for a full investigation." As the crew worked quickly to plot the ship's trajectory, Lila stared out at the starry expanse ahead. The readings they had received suggested that the structure was located in a remote nebula, a region known for its strange electromagnetic fields and unpredictable gravitational anomalies. There were no records of anything resembling it in human or X-Krill databases. This was entirely new territory. Within minutes, the Horizon altered its course, sliding silently through the empty vastness of space. The silence was both unnerving and comforting. It was a reminder of the ship's newfound power, the gift of invisibility bestowed upon it by the mysterious artifact they had recovered months ago. Approaching the coordinates, Orion called from his station, "Prepare for scan." Lila nodded, her hands tightening around the armrests of her chair. Her crew had grown accustomed to moments of tension, but today felt different. The air seemed thick, charged with anticipation. Something in the back of her mind whispered that this was no coincidence. This was humanity's chance. A series of strange, fluctuating signals began to appear on the ship's screens, signals too structured, too deliberate to be natural. Lila's breath caught in her throat. This was no ordinary anomaly. The readings matched nothing known to human or X-Krill science. As the structure began to emerge from the nebulous haze, it was unlike anything Lila had ever seen. A vast, monolithic formation, angular yet organic, with smooth surfaces that seemed to shimmer in the void. On screen, Lila ordered. The structure was impossibly large, seemingly built into the very fabric of space itself. It pulsed with an eerie light, its shape bending in ways that defied physics. This, "This can't be real," muttered Lieutenant Holt, his eyes wide with disbelief. Lila felt the same sense of awe and trepidation. There was something alive about it, something ancient, yet undeniably intelligent. She swallowed hard, her gaze never leaving the strange, glowing monument. "Prepare a boarding party," she said, her voice firm. "We need to know what this is, and why it's here." A silence fell over the bridge as the crew exchanged uneasy glances. They were all too aware that their mission could be a one-way trip. Yet, in the pit of her stomach, Lila felt a strange sense of destiny. This was more than just an unknown structure. This could be humanity's salvation, or their final resting place. "Captain," Orion said softly, "I don't like the readings. There's something wrong." Layla turned to face him, meeting his worried gaze. "We've come this far. We can't turn back now." The crew had no choice but to follow, knowing that whatever awaited them in the darkness could change the course of the universe. As they moved closer to the structure, the entire ship seemed to hum with an energy that was both alien and familiar. Lila's mind raced with possibilities. What if this artifact was humanity's last chance? What if this was the Pilgrim's gift, hidden from the ex-Quirrell for a reason? "Captain," Holt said, his voice now trembling, "I think we're being watched." Leela froze, her heart skipping a beat. The weight of Holt's words hung in the air like a dark omen. Watched. The word echoed in her mind as the hum of the horizon vibrated beneath her feet, its steady pulse now feeling unsettlingly fragile. Every creak of the ship seemed to amplify in the silence of the bridge. She couldn't shake the feeling that the structure before them wasn't just a relic of an ancient race. It was alive, sentient, perhaps even watching them. "Run a full scan," Layla ordered, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "See if there's anything in the immediate vicinity." Orion Holt's hands moved quickly over the controls, his face etched with concern. "I've already done that, Captain." "No other ships, no life forms, nothing," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "But there's a strange energy signature coming from the structure. It's fluctuating, almost as if it's responding to us." Lila's eyes narrowed. "Responding to us?" Holt didn't need to answer. The pulsing light from the structure seemed to grow stronger, brighter, intensifying with each passing second, as though it were aware of their presence, acknowledging them. The ship's sensors flared, and a chill ran down Lila's spine. "Shields up," she commanded, her grip tightening on the armrest. "Prepare for anything." The crew fell into a tense silence, their focus sharp. The moment stretched, as if time itself were holding its breath. Lila glanced around the bridge at her crew, her dwindling family. They were the last of humanity. If this was a trap, they wouldn't survive. But she knew one thing: they would fight to the end. Suddenly, the ship lurched, throwing everyone against their seats, as the horizon was jolted by an unseen force. The lights flickered, and the entire bridge was plunged into temporary darkness. When the emergency lights kicked on, Lila saw Holt's wide eyes. His voice was barely a whisper. "Captain, we've been." Before he could finish, a deep, resonating hum vibrated through the ship, so powerful that the very walls seemed to reverberate with it. The crew gripped their consoles, bracing against the force. In the eerie silence that followed, Lila's breath caught in her throat. The ship's readings had gone haywire. The anomaly wasn't just a signal, it was a presence. Something was inside the structure, and it was reaching out to them. "Captain, it's not just a structure," Lieutenant Kaya Anders, the ship's engineer, said from across the room, her voice tight with fear. "It's a living thing. Whatever this is, it's like a neural network, an organism. and it's communicating with us. Lila's mind raced. This wasn't just an artifact. It was a relic of an ancient, highly advanced civilization, perhaps one far older than the ex-Kirill. The Pilgrims. The whispered legends of a race that shaped the universe, leaving behind technology that could alter the very fabric of reality. Lila had always thought of them as a myth, but now, standing on the precipice of the unknown, she began to wonder if the Pilgrims had left more than just technology behind. "Set course for the structure," Lila said, her voice commanding despite the unease clawing at her insides. "We need to board and see what's inside. I don't care if it's a trap. We've come this far." Orion hesitated but nodded, his fingers flying over the console as the horizon slowly moved toward the massive structure. The closer they got, the more the ship's systems seemed to flicker and respond, as though the structure itself were alive and aware of their every movement. Lila couldn't explain it, but she felt it. A deep, primal connection between her crew and this strange, otherworldly creation. As they drew nearer, a shimmering, translucent wall of energy appeared around the structure's entrance. Lila watched, her breath caught in her chest. This was no ordinary object. It was a gateway, a way forward, or perhaps a way to their doom. The ship hovered in front of the energy barrier, the light from the structure flickering as though waiting for a response. A low, almost musical hum resonated through the ship, sending vibrations through Lila's bones. Then, without warning, the energy field parted, as though welcoming them inside. "Prepare the boarding party," Lila said, her voice unwavering despite the fear that gripped her. "We're going in." A sense of dread washed over the crew, but it was tempered by a shared resolve. They had come so far, and despite the unknowns, humanity had always been a species that fought, that explored, that survived. This was their chance to change the course of the universe, to prove that the human spirit could not be extinguished. As the boarding team suited up, Lila looked around at the few remaining souls aboard the Horizon. Each one of them had been through hell, and each one of them was now stepping into the unknown. They had no idea what lay ahead, but they were ready. The ship's airlock opened with a hiss, and Lila led her crew into the dark, glowing interior of the structure. The air was thick, almost impossibly heavy, with an eerie stillness that settled over them like a shroud. "Stay alert," Lila ordered, her voice cutting through the silence. "This could be more than we bargained for." The moment the team stepped inside, the doors behind them slammed shut with a heavy, resounding thud. The hum from the walls deepened, reverberating through the corridors. It was as if the structure had just sealed them in, and it was waiting. A strange metallic scent filled the air, and a low rumbling sound echoed through the chamber, like the pulse of a heartbeat. Lila's heart raced as she motioned for her crew to advance, each step taking them further into the heart of the unknown. And then, from the shadows ahead, a voice, a whisper barely audible, spoke. "Humanity, the last key." Lila's pulse quickened. The words vibrated in the very air, resonating in her bones, as if the very walls of the structure had spoken them. The voice was not mechanical. It was organic, alien, yet it seemed to have a familiarity that unsettled her. It wasn't a voice she could place. There was no identifiable sound, no human or ex-Kirill inflection. Yet it felt intimate, as though it knew her, knew them. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their weapons at the ready, but the words hung in the air, making their nerves feel even sharper. There was no immediate danger, no alien ambush, but the very atmosphere of the place felt alive, almost as though the structure itself was watching them, waiting. Layla stepped forward, her boots softly tapping against the metallic floor. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice firm, but it quivered slightly in the vast empty space. The response came immediately, though no source could be seen. "We are the echoes of the pilgrims, of those who shaped the stars. You, humanity, are the inheritors of a legacy, one that will define the fate of the universe." The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding them in the chilling emptiness of the structure. Lila's mind raced. The pilgrims. She had only ever heard of them in whispers, ancient tales passed down through fragments of records and myths. The notion that they had left a legacy, that humanity might play a role in it, was both an incredible revelation and an enormous burden. The team advanced cautiously, following Lila's lead, moving deeper into the darkened corridor. The walls were smooth, almost liquid, with shifting patterns of light flickering within them, like stars in a nebula. It was breathtaking, but it also felt unnatural, disorienting, like walking through a dream. "You said humanity is the last key. What does that mean?" Lila pressed, her voice steady despite the rising tide of uncertainty. She had to know. They had to understand what was at stake. A pulse of energy crackled through the air, and then the voice responded. The pilgrims foresaw the end of the great cycle, the coming of the ex-Kuril. They knew the balance would tip, and the universe would collapse under the weight of their conquest. Humanity's role is not one of saviors or conquerors. You are the architects of what comes next. You will either rebuild or destroy. The choice is yours. The words hung heavy in the air, and the crew paused, their eyes on Lila, waiting for her next command. It felt as if the very weight of the universe had settled on her shoulders. They had been fighting just to survive, but now they had been entrusted with something far greater. The pilgrims had seen this moment, this choice, and they had left it to humanity to decide the fate of all existence. Rebuild or destroy? Lila murmured to herself, trying to process the enormity of it all. It felt impossible. Humanity had lost everything, and now they were supposed to be the ones to shape the future. Before she could voice her doubts, a low rumble shook the ground beneath them, sending a tremor through the chamber. The walls shifted, and a new passage opened before them. The structure seemed to be guiding them, moving them deeper into its core. "This way," Lila said, her voice rising above the rumbling. She didn't know what to expect, but she couldn't let hesitation stop them. "Not now. Let's move out." They followed the newly revealed path, each step taking them deeper into the heart of the structure. As they moved forward, the air grew thicker, and the hum around them intensified. It wasn't just the sound of machinery, it was something more, something resonant, like a heartbeat echoing through the very fabric of the structure. Eventually, they entered a vast open chamber. Its walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with a rhythm that matched the beating of their hearts. At the center of the room stood a large, intricate device, an altar of sorts, made of an unknown, shimmering material. It seemed ancient, yet its design was unlike anything they had ever seen. Lila stepped closer, instinctively drawn to it. As her hand hovered above the altar, a surge of energy rippled through her. The symbols around the room began to glow brighter, and the device activated, a low hum filling the air. "This is it," Kaya whispered, her voice trembling with awe. "This is what we've been looking for." Suddenly, a burst of light erupted from the device, surrounding the crew. Lila staggered back, her eyes squeezed shut against the intensity of the glow. For a moment, she was disoriented, and then silence. When the light faded, the room was transformed. The device had revealed something hidden within the walls, an enormous crystalline sphere suspended in the center of the chamber. It was alive with energy, glowing with an ethereal light that seemed to pulse with a force all its own. The voice returned, now softer, as if it were speaking directly into Lila's mind. "Humanity, the gift of silence is yours," it said. "You will carry this power. It is both a weapon and a shield. Use it wisely." Lila's breath caught in her throat. The gift of silence. The artifact, the mysterious power they had discovered, it was tied to this sphere. Somehow, it was the key to everything. To humanity's survival. To the universe's future. As the words echoed in her mind, the weight of their meaning settled deep within her. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the key to hiding, to being unseen. It was power that could turn the tide of any battle. But Lila knew that such power came with a cost. With one final, resonant pulse, the sphere began to hum louder, its glow intensifying. Lila knew that the choice was upon them. The silence could either destroy them or make them the architects of a new future. But they had no time to question it now. The XK-Rill were coming. The universe was waiting. Lila's heart pounded in her chest, her eyes fixed on the crystalline sphere now, pulsing with an intensity that seemed to stretch the very fabric of the universe. The weight of the gift of silence pressed against her, heavy and dangerous. This wasn't just a relic. It was a weapon, a shield, and perhaps something more, a catalyst for the next chapter in humanity's story. The hum of the sphere resonated through the chamber, filling the air with an almost tangible pressure. Lila could feel the energy vibrating in her bones, like a distant storm on the horizon, its power both terrifying and beautiful. The voice that had spoken to her earlier now seemed to fade into the background, its presence lingering but distant. The silence, she realized, was not just in the absence of sound. It was in the weight of what had been left unsaid, the unspoken promise that this power came with a price. "We need to move," Lieutenant Holt said, his voice breaking through Lila's reverie. His face was pale, his eyes wide with concern as he glanced toward the entrance of the chamber. "The XK-Rill will be here soon. We don't have much time." Lila tore her gaze away from the glowing sphere, her mind snapping back to the present. They couldn't afford to linger in this strange, alien place for too long. The XK-Rill would be relentless, hunting down any traces of humanity with cold precision. If they had even the slightest chance of surviving, they needed to understand this power and what it meant for the future. "We found it," Lila said, her voice steady. "This sphere, it's the key, but we still don't know how to use it." Kaya, the ship's engineer, stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached out toward the sphere. "The Pilgrims left this for us," she said, almost to herself. "But it's not just a weapon. It's something more. A force we can't even begin to comprehend." Layla nodded. "We need to take it with us. If the XK-Rill understand what it is, they'll come for it. We can't let them get their hands on it." But as she turned toward the exit, the walls of the chamber shifted, groaning and whirring with a sound that was almost organic. The entrance they had come through had closed, sealed shut as if the structure itself had decided their fate. "We're trapped," Orion said, his voice tight with panic. "What is this place? Why is it doing this?" Lila's mind raced, but she couldn't afford to panic. This was no ordinary structure. It was alive in ways they couldn't understand. The Pilgrims had designed it, but its purpose was unclear. Why had it chosen humanity? Why had it left them this gift? Before she could respond, the hum from the sphere grew louder, its resonance shaking the walls around them. The air grew colder, and the symbols on the walls flickered to life, glowing brighter with an unnatural intensity. In the center of the chamber, the sphere began to levitate, rising from its pedestal with a smooth, fluid motion, as if drawn by an invisible force. The sphere. It's reacting to something, Kaya said, her voice awed. It's alive. It's calling us. Layla stepped forward, compelled by a force she couldn't explain. The power of the sphere seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, and as she reached out toward it, the room around her seemed to fade away. The very air seemed to ripple, as if the structure itself were reshaping reality around them. A voice, familiar yet distant, filled her mind again, this time clear and direct. You have been chosen. Layla gasped, stepping back. The voice was hers, but not hers. It was a melding of thoughts, as if the structure itself were speaking through her, sharing her mind, her fears, and her desires. Humanity stands on the edge of oblivion. The power you wield can either be the salvation of the universe or its destruction. You must choose. You must understand what you carry. The sphere pulsed once more, and the world around Layla seemed to shift. In a flash, the chamber was gone. The familiar, glowing symbols and alien walls faded into nothingness, replaced by an overwhelming blackness. Layla felt herself falling, her stomach lurching with the sensation of weightlessness. Suddenly, a vision burst into her mind, a vivid scene, almost too real to be a dream. She saw herself standing before a massive warship, the silhouette of the horizon dwarfed by the enormous extraterrestrial fleet. The alien ships loomed, monstrous and deadly, their weapons primed for annihilation. But then something shifted. The sphere's energy wrapped around her like an invisible force, pulsing with untold power. She could see it now, a vast, invisible field surrounding her ship, bending light, bending reality itself. The ex-Kyril's weapons fired, but their blasts scattered harmlessly in every direction, as if the very fabric of space itself rejected them. The ex-Kyril ships, powerful as they were, became nothing in the face of the silence that enveloped them. Layla snapped back to reality, breathless and disoriented. The chamber was the same, but everything had changed. She now understood. The gift of silence wasn't just a tool. It was a shield, a weapon, a force that could bend the laws of space and time. It could turn the tide of any battle, render any enemy powerless, and make the user invisible to all who sought to destroy them. But there was a cost. It will drain you, the voice whispered again, its presence closer than before. To wield such power is to give up something in return. The silence will demand its due. Layla's mind raced, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had always known that victory came at a price, but now the cost was clearer than ever. The silence could give humanity a chance to survive, to fight back against the ex-Kyril, but at what cost? What would it demand from them? From her? The air around her vibrated with tension as the structure seemed to hold its breath. The ex-Kyril were coming, and Layla knew that the time for decisions had arrived. Would they choose the path of salvation, or would they be consumed by the very power that could save them? Captain, Holt said, his voice shaky but determined, we need to decide now. The silence in the chamber stretched on, suffocating and overwhelming, as if the very fabric of existence had been suspended. Layla stood motionless, her mind scrambling to process what had just occurred. The sphere had activated, its energy now thrumming through the air, but something was wrong. The absence of sound wasn't just a quieting. It was as if reality itself had been altered. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, deafening in the unnatural stillness. She looked around, but the crew seemed frozen, their faces pale and wide-eyed. The sense of power that had surged through her was gone, replaced by an unsettling emptiness. Captain, what happened? Kaya's voice was a faint whisper, barely audible in the void that had descended upon them. She stepped back from the pedestal, her hand trembling as she wiped sweat from her brow. I didn't expect this, I thought. We activated it, Lila said softly, her voice the only sound in the room. It felt strange to hear her own words. They felt out of place, unnatural. But nothing's happening. Not the way I thought it would. The pulse of energy from the sphere had dissipated, leaving only the silent hum of the structure. But now Lila felt the weight of something intangible hanging in the air, an impending force, something powerful, something she couldn't see, but could feel deep within her bones. She glanced at Holt, who stood frozen, his eyes scanning the chamber as if waiting for the next move. "What do you think?" Lila asked, her voice low. Is this what we were meant to do?" Holt swallowed hard. "I don't know, Captain. It doesn't feel right. The ex-Kirill could still find us. We've activated the silence, but it's like a void now. I'm not sure how we can use it to our advantage." Before Lila could respond, the ship's comms suddenly crackled to life, the distortion sharp and jarring in the eerie stillness of the room. The voice on the other end was strained, desperate. "Captain, we've got a problem." Orion's voice came through, the first sound from outside the chamber in what felt like an eternity. "The ex-Kirill, they're here. Their fleet just dropped out of hyperspace. We're not going to have much time before they lock onto our position." Lila's heart skipped a beat. The ex-Kirill were here. It was happening. All their preparations, all their desperate hope that the silence could protect them, were about to be put to the test. The universe, it seemed, was forcing their hand. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "We need to get to the bridge now. Activate the silence across the entire ship. We don't have a moment to waste." The crew snapped into motion, their fear replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Holt and Orion moved to the back of the room to secure the exit, while Kaya hurriedly began to recalibrate the device that had triggered the sphere. Lila remained at the center, the weight of the sphere's power pressing against her chest. She could feel a hum in her chest, almost as though the silence was waiting to be unleashed, to shield them from the coming storm. As they made their way down the darkened corridors of the alien structure, Lila's thoughts raced. She had chosen the silence because it was the only option that seemed to offer a chance of survival, but now, with the ex-Kirill bearing down on them, she wasn't sure how it would work. The power to hide, to shield, was one thing, but to hold off an entire fleet, that was something else entirely. What if this doesn't work? Kaya murmured as they entered the main corridor leading to the ship's bridge. "It has to," Lila said, her voice firm despite the doubts swirling in her mind. "We don't have a choice." They arrived at the bridge, the crew already at their stations, faces set with grim determination. Lila took her place at the helm, her hands instinctively flying over the controls. The ship's sensors flickered to life, and before her, a massive display appeared, showing the ex-Kirill fleet. Hundreds of ships, each one a lethal weapon, now on an intercept course. "We need to initiate the silence," Kaya said, her voice tight. She tapped a sequence into the console, and the room seemed to hold its breath as the ship's systems began to power up in response. Lila's fingers hovered over the final activation button. She could feel the sphere's presence like a heartbeat inside her, its pulse syncing with hers. But as she readied herself to unleash its power, something in the back of her mind nagged at her, a warning, a subtle twinge of uncertainty. She had felt the silence before, inside the chamber, but this felt different. The sheer scale of the silence they were about to unleash, It was almost too much. But there was no time to hesitate. She pressed the button. The ship shuddered as the silence spread across the entire vessel. The hum of the engines cut out, the electronic noise vanished, leaving a complete and utter void in its wake. It wasn't just the sound that had disappeared. It was as if the very presence of the ship itself was being erased from existence. The ex-Cruville fleet on the radar began to pulse, their sensors no longer registering any sign of the ship. For a moment, Lila thought they had succeeded. The ex-Cruville ships would pass by, unaware of their presence. But then the comms came alive again, a voice distorted by static. They've found us. Orion's voice gasped, almost unrecognizable. Their sensors. They're detecting us. The silence. It's not enough. Lila's blood ran cold. The silence hadn't worked. The ex-Cruville were still coming, and the cost of using this power was becoming clearer by the second. The silence was more than just the absence of sound. It was a distortion, a disruption in the fabric of reality itself. And now the universe was pushing back. They had triggered something far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. "Get ready," Lila said, her voice grim. "The real battle starts now." The tension on the bridge was unbearable. Lila's fingers hovered over the controls, her eyes locked on the flickering display. The ex-Cruville fleet was closing in, their ships now moving with eerie precision. They should have been blind to the horizon's presence, but the sensors were still detecting them. The silence, their supposed shield, had failed to mask them completely. How? Kaya murmured from behind her, her voice filled with disbelief. The silence. It should have worked. It should have hidden us. Lila's mind raced. The ex-Cruville had a reputation for their advanced sensor technology, but this was something else. The silence wasn't supposed to simply obscure their location. It was meant to protect, to render them invisible on every level. Yet the ex-Cruville were somehow bypassing it, pushing through the veil that had fallen around them. She glanced at Holt, who stood by the communications console, his face pale and taut with worry. "They're locking onto us," he said, voice steady despite the panic rising in his eyes. "The fleet's adjusting their trajectory. They know we're here. What do we do?" Kaya's voice was frantic, but there was no mistaking the determination beneath her words. The silence hadn't worked as expected, but they couldn't afford to give up. Lila swallowed hard, her mind flickering through every possibility. They had to figure out how to use the silence to their advantage, or they would be wiped out. She had thought the silence would shield them, but now it was clear that it wasn't just a cloak. It was a weapon, a force that could have unintended consequences. "Captain," Holt said, his voice tight, "we have another problem. The ex-Cruville are not just using their sensors. They are transmitting something. A signal, some sort of countermeasure. It's like they've adapted to the silence." Layla felt her stomach churn. This wasn't just a battle of firepower. It was becoming a war of perception, of manipulation. The ex-Cruville had always been formidable, but now they seemed to be on the edge of understanding the power that had been unleashed. The silence was no longer just a defensive tool. It was a challenge, something the ex-Cruville would fight to control, just as they had fought humanity for so long. "Their fleet is recalibrating," Holt continued. "They're adapting their countermeasures. If we don't act quickly, they'll break through." Lila's mind raced. What if we reverse the silence? Amplify it, force the ex-Cruville to face the same void we've created. Kaya looked up at her, eyes wide with realization. "You mean, make the silence so absolute that it shuts down their systems completely? Overwhelm their sensors?" Layla nodded. "Exactly. If we push the silence beyond what they're capable of countering, it could disorient them long enough for us to strike back. But the idea wasn't without risks. The silence was already beginning to warp their perception of reality. Would amplifying it cause even more damage? Would it push them too far, rendering them just as vulnerable as the enemy they were trying to outwit? "There's no time," Layla said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. "We'll need to do this quickly. If we're going to survive, we can't afford to second-guess ourselves." Kaya quickly began working the controls, her fingers flying over the panel as she manipulated the ship's systems. Holt and the other crew members watched anxiously, their faces reflecting the weight of the decision they were about to make. "Captain," Holt said, his voice tight with anxiety, "we can't be sure the X-Krill will stay affected long enough for us to mount an offense. If this doesn't work, we'll have no way to fight back." "I know," Layla said, her eyes hardening. "But the alternative is death. We have to take the chance." Kaya gave a small nod, her hands still shaking as she worked. "Reversing the polarity on the silence generator. We'll flood the area with an amplified wave. It'll be the most intense version of the silence we can create." A brief pause as the crew prepared. Lila's heart was in her throat. This wasn't just a calculated risk, it was a gamble. The silence might wipe out the X-Krill sensors, but it could also have catastrophic effects on their own ship. They didn't know the full extent of the power they were dealing with. "Now," Layla said. Kaya pressed the final sequence of buttons, and the ship trembled. A low, thrumming sound filled the bridge, subtle at first, then escalating rapidly. Layla could feel it in the pit of her stomach as the silence spread, rippling outward from the ship like a shockwave. The walls vibrated with the intensity of the pulse, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then the display flickered. The X-Krill fleet's ships, huge, imposing, seemed to falter, their weapons and shields going dark. Lila's heart skipped a beat as she watched their movement slow. The signal from the X-Krill fleet became erratic, the ships no longer moving with their usual precision. "It's working," Kaya breathed, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and triumph. "They're being affected by the silence. Their systems are malfunctioning." Layla leaned forward, her pulse quickening. The silence was taking hold, rendering the X-Krill fleet vulnerable. But she knew better than to celebrate too soon. This was just the beginning. The X-Krill were relentless, and even if their systems were compromised, they would adapt. But this was their chance. "Prepare to fire," Layla ordered, her voice firm. "Let's show them the price of underestimating humanity." Kaya and Holt worked quickly, lining up their weapon systems as the ship's targeting array locked onto the now crippled X-Krill fleet. Layla took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. This could be their one opportunity. If they didn't act now, the silence might fade, and the X-Krill would adapt once more. The Horizon's cannons fired in synchronized bursts, the first strike hitting the lead X-Krill ship with devastating force. The energy from the explosion rippled outward, amplifying the effect of the silence as it spread across the entire fleet. For a moment, the silence was complete and the X-Krill fleet was left in chaos. But Layla knew it wouldn't last. They had broken the silence. Now, the real battle would begin. The Horizon shuddered as its weapons fired, sending devastating energy pulses that tore through the disoriented X-Krill ships. The lead ship exploded in a violent flash, followed by a cascade of secondary detonations. For a brief, fleeting moment, the crew allowed themselves to believe they had gained the upper hand. But the silence was far from a victory. It was a weapon, a force that could undo everything, its power too dangerous to wield lightly, and its effects too unpredictable. Layla gripped the armrest of her command chair, her eyes locked on the view screen. The remaining ex-Kubril fleet was reeling from the first blow, but their retaliatory countermeasures were already kicking in. The silence had affected their sensors, but their strategic minds were still sharp. And now they were adapting. Their secondary fleet is charging. Holt shouted from his post, his voice tight with urgency. They're recovering faster than we expected. We need to hit them again before they regroup. Kaya, her face pale but determined, worked furiously at her console. The silence was still thick in the air, vibrating through every system, every fiber of the ship. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, trying to steady her nerves. Captain, the silence. It's destabilizing. It's too intense. If we don't pull back soon, the horizon could start malfunctioning. Lila's heart pounded. They had no choice but to push forward, but at what cost? The silence was overwhelming. Too much power, too much force. She could feel it in her mind, the nagging pressure that seemed to push her thoughts out of clarity, to dull her senses. The longer they held the silence, the more fragmented reality became. We can't let up, Lila said through gritted teeth. We're not retreating. Not now. Holt shot her a glance. His eyes narrowed in concern, but he didn't argue. The crew had always followed her, even when they weren't sure of the path. This was no different. They had pushed themselves to the limit, and now the only option was to push harder. Fire again! Lila commanded, her voice cutting through the thick tension. We need to disable their engines, take out their propulsion systems. The crew responded immediately, and the horizon unleashed another volley of fire. The energy bolts ripped through the ex-Kubril fleet, striking multiple ships with pinpoint accuracy. The effect was catastrophic. Several ships spiraled out of control, their engines fried, and their weapon systems disabled. The silence reverberated with each hit, the shockwaves echoing through the ex-Kubril lines. But the ex-Kubril were relentless. Their fleet's adaptive nature kicked into overdrive. Some ships began to activate secondary propulsion systems, using unconventional methods to resist the silence's hold. Others deployed cloaking devices, cloaking their movements, making them harder to track. The ex-Kubril were no strangers to adversity. They thrived in chaos, and now they were fighting to reclaim the upper hand. Captain, their adaptive measures are overwhelming us, Kaya called out. They're compensating for the silence. It's affecting our targeting systems. We're running out of time. Lila's pulse quickened. The silence, once their greatest asset, was becoming their greatest liability. The more they used it, the more unstable it became. The very fabric of their reality was tearing, bending, distorting. The ship's systems were on the verge of total failure, and the crew was at their breaking point. If they didn't pull back soon, they would lose everything, their ship, their lives, and the very chance they had at defeating the ex-Kubril. We need to deactivate the silence, Lila said, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. Kaya, can you? But before she could finish, a sudden blinding flash lit up the bridge, followed by an intense wave of pressure that shook the ship to its core. The walls groaned in protest, and the lights flickered as the ship's systems struggled to stay functional. Report. Lila barked, her voice sharp with alarm. Holt was already scrambling at his console, his face flushed with panic. Captain, they're using an amplified countermeasure, the ex-Kubril. They've reversed the polarity of the silence. Lila's breath caught in her throat. The ex-Kirill had found a way to turn their own weapon against them. In their desperation to fight back, they had found the source of the silence, had discovered how to disrupt it, twist it to their will. The silence, once an impenetrable shield, was now a weapon that could be turned on them, amplifying their vulnerabilities instead of hiding them. The horizon, the systems are failing. Kaya cried, her voice cracking as she fought to maintain control of the ship. We can't stop them. The silence is. It's tearing apart our reality. Lila's eyes darted around the bridge. The crew was in full panic mode now. Things were slipping beyond their control. The ex-Kirill were closing in, and their countermeasures were too advanced, too dangerous. The ship was slipping into a state of decay, the silence now a destabilizing force they couldn't manage. But then, through the haze of impending chaos, Lila's mind cleared. She had one final option, an option she had hoped never to use. It was a last resort, a gamble, and one that could change everything. Kaya, initiate a full system overload, she commanded. We're going to break the silence. Completely. Overload every power core, every system. We'll burn through the silence and unleash everything we've got in one final strike. Kaya looked at her eyes wide with shock. Captain, are you sure? That could destroy the ship. I'm sure, Lila said, her voice resolute. If we can't defeat them with the silence, then we'll defeat them with everything we've got. Now do it. The crew hesitated for only a moment before springing into action. The horizon was on the brink, teetering between life and death. And now, with the ex-Kirill closing in for the kill, Lila knew there was no time left to wait. They would either win or they would burn. And they would take the ex-Kirill with them. The horizon groaned beneath the strain as the crew pushed its systems to the brink of collapse. The ship was already unstable, the silence that had protected them now twisted and unpredictable. Lila's pulse hammered in her ears, and her thoughts raced as Kaya worked furiously at the console, initiating the overload sequence. Overload initiated, Kaya said, her voice tight with urgency. If we do this, it's all or nothing, Captain. We'll burn through everything, the power, the systems, the silence itself. We'll be exposed to the ex-Kirill the moment it's done. Layla nodded grimly. Then we fight, full force. No holding back. The horizon's engines trembled beneath them as the overload built. Every system, every core, surged with violent energy. The silence, once a barrier that held their enemies at bay, was now unraveling, torn apart by the intense pressure of the overload. Captain, the ex-Kirill are closing in, Holt shouted, his voice strained. The view screen showed the enemy fleet, now in full pursuit, their weapons ready to fire. Their ships were circling like predators, waiting to finish off the wounded prey. Layla gripped the armrests of her chair, her mind sharp despite the chaos. There was no time to wait. The silence had failed them, but the horizon wasn't done yet. Not while there was a breath left in their lungs. Kaya, release everything, she commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. Initiate the full power burst. We're going to use every ounce of this overload to wipe them out. Kaya's fingers flew over the controls, punching in the final command. The ship's systems howled in protest as every last drop of energy was funneled into the primary weapons. The soundless hum that had pervaded the bridge surged to an unbearable crescendo as the ship's cannons powered up. The walls of the bridge trembled as the ship seemed to draw in a breath, preparing for its last stand. Ready, Kaya said, her voice steady but laced with apprehension. The silence is gone. We're exposed. Lila's gaze never wavered from the display, The ex-Kuril were just moments away, but she wasn't afraid. This was their final chance, their last shot, and she would take it. "Now," Layla ordered. The horizon erupted in a blinding flash of light as the power surged through its weapons. Energy bolts, larger and more intense than anything they had fired before, tore through the space between the ship and the oncoming ex-Kuril fleet. The first wave of fire hit the nearest ship, blasting it into smithereens. The explosion reverberated outward, the shockwaves shaking the bridge as the silence that had held the fleet back evaporated. The ex-Kuril ships scattered, their formations breaking apart as they attempted to avoid the onslaught. But Layla was relentless. She had no intention of letting them regroup. She fired again and again, each shot obliterating one of the alien ships, each burst of energy washing away the ex-Kuril's pride, their superiority, their cruel empire. The horizon was on fire, literally and figuratively. The ship shuddered violently with each blast, each weapon discharge leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The silence was gone, replaced by the roaring fury of their final stand. The ex-Kuril fleet was crumbling. The barrage of fire from the horizon tore through their ranks, their ships now disabled, floating in disarray. They had underestimated humanity, had believed that the silence, the ultimate weapon, would be their undoing. But it was their arrogance that had led to their downfall. In the chaos, one final enemy ship remained, the flagship. It was larger than the others, heavily armored, its weapons crackling with lethal energy. "We need to end this," Holt said, his voice grim. "That ship is still operational. If we don't destroy it, they could regroup, counterattack." Layla nodded. There was no time left to waste. The horizon was barely holding together, but it had enough power left for one last strike. "Kaya, line up a shot," Layla commanded. "This is our chance to finish it." Kaya's hands were a blur over the console, the targeting system locking onto the flagship. The massive ship loomed ahead, its weapons charged and ready to unleash destruction. "Ready," Kaya said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's systems. Layla held her breath. The horizon was falling apart around them, but they had one shot. One final chance to end the war, to prove that humanity would never be crushed. Fire. The ship erupted with all the remaining power they could muster. The blast was a wave of destruction, a brilliant, searing light that tore through space. The ex-Kuril flagship was struck dead center, its hull cracking apart, its weapons systems exploding in a cataclysmic chain reaction. The ship disintegrated, its wreckage scattering into the void. For a moment, everything seemed to hold still. The silence gone, the chaos still. Then, slowly, the reality of what had just occurred sank in. The ex-Kuril fleet was shattered. The horizon, damaged beyond repair, was still alive. Against all odds, they had won. But the silence was gone, and with it, a part of their very essence. The cost of victory had been steep, but humanity had proven something that day. They weren't just survivors. They were conquerors. "We did it," Kaya whispered, her voice trembling. Layla took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything they had just overcome. But she didn't smile. Not yet. There was still a war to end, a universe to rebuild. And this was just the beginning. The horizon sailed on, its broken hull gliding through the stars, a testament to the human will, indomitable and unyielding.